It's funny how a single night can stick with you forever. For me, it was a late summer evening in an abandoned middle school. It was supposed to be just another adventure for me and my friends, exploring a decaying building, spraying some paint, maybe setting off a few fireworks from the roof. We thought we were alone in that massive, silent building. We were just messing around, laughing in the dark hallways, our flashlights cutting through the dust. But then things started to feel wrong. It started with my friend's bag of spray paint just vanishing. We thought one of us was playing a prank. But then we found it in a small dark room on the second floor. It was sitting on the ground right next to a massive pentagram, and the paint was still dripping down the wall. That was the moment we realized this wasn't a prank. We weren't alone. And as we stood there frozen, we heard it from the end of the pitch black hallway. Not footsteps, not a shout, just a slow, sharp, hissing sound. I should have cut you when I had the chance. This is a story I haven't thought about in a long time, and for good reason. It's one of those true scary stories you keep locked away. My friends and I, we had a thing for exploring. Growing up in New Jersey, there were more than enough abandoned places within driving distance to keep us busy. Looking back, a lot of what we did wasn't all that remarkable. Just decaying buildings, empty warehouses, you know, the usual stuff. But every now and then, you'd stumble across something more. There was this one place that had been on our radar for a while, an abandoned middle school about a 30-minute drive away. For privacy, I won't drop the name, but if you're into North Jersey urban exploring, you probably know exactly which school I'm talking about. We'd seen the pictures online, the crumbling hallways, the graffiti-covered walls, and figured it was finally time to check it out for ourselves. It was late summer, that time of year when boredom starts to really set in. We were tired of the usual routine, which was mostly just playing basketball in my backyard and driving around aimlessly. I can't remember who first brought up the idea, but it was one of those spontaneous decisions that just felt right. There were 4 of us that night: me, Yuri, Frank, and Freddie. Frank and I were really into graffiti, so we brought a few cans of black and white spray paint. Beyond that, my bag was mostly filled with some Roman candles I had left over from the 4th of July. Our plan for these kinds of nights was always the same. We'd mess around inside, find our way to the roof, shoot off some fireworks, and then sprint out of there before any cops rolled up. This evening, we figured, would be no different. We were pleasantly surprised to see that the fence around the perimeter had already been cut. We came prepared to climb it, but I was definitely glad we didn't have to. The school was huge, way bigger than the pictures online had led us to believe. It would have taken forever to explore the whole thing, but that was actually a good thing since the 4 of us were prone to getting bored pretty quickly. Frank led the way through the hole in the fence, followed by Yuri, then me. Freddie, being the most fearless of our group, volunteered to bring up the rear. We circled the building until we found a door that wasn't boarded up, and with a heavy creak, we stepped inside. Even with our flashlights cutting through the darkness, it was eerie. Picture your old childhood school, but dead silent. Every hallway was stripped down to exposed wires and crumbling tile. Insulation hung from the ceiling like strange yellow vines, and there were bits of broken furniture scattered everywhere. The entrance we found opened right into a long hallway, which we happily started walking down after clicking on our flashlights. We were all really proud of our flashlights for whatever reason. When I say powerful, I mean it. Mine cost $60 and could illuminate an entire room with a beam so bright It could blind you for a few seconds if you glanced at it by mistake. It was a lot of money for a flashlight, but I thought it was worth it. The walls were coated in graffiti. Some of it was genuinely good art. Some of it was just awful. Frank and I would pause here and there to check out a few tags, but mostly we kept moving. I'll spare you all the details about the building itself, but it was honestly really cool. We found the old auditorium, and seeing all those empty seats and a stage that was literally falling apart was a pretty dope sight. We made a quick loop through the basement next, which was by far the most run-down part of the entire school. We didn't spend much time down there, partly because of how decayed everything was, but mostly because I could tell my friends were starting to get creeped out. One of the rooms we passed had a massive pentagram painted on the floor. It wasn't exactly a comforting sight. It felt like the start of one of those creepy stories you hear about online. Yeah, it was weird, but not that unusual. Anyone who's done urban exploring knows these kinds of things pop up everywhere. Still, we didn't linger. The four of us eventually made our way back upstairs, heading for the second floor. One of the classrooms we found had a completely untouched white wall, basically a blank canvas. Frank and I just grinned at each other. This was what we came for. As we started throwing some paint up, Yuri and Freddie told us they were going to keep exploring and look for a way to the roof. They disappeared down one of the dark hallways while we stayed back, the sound of our spray cans hissing in the silence. Once we wrapped up our piece, a pretty decent black and white tag, Frank wanted to keep working on another section of the wall. I, on the other hand, was done for the moment. My creative energy was spent. I wandered out of the classroom to check out some of the better artwork along the nearby corridors. Some of the stuff in these places is genuinely incredible, full-blown murals that must have taken hours, hidden away in the dark where only a few people would ever see them. It's like a secret art gallery. I was standing there, my flashlight beam focused on this one intricate piece, just admiring the skill. I must have been there for about 5 minutes, completely lost in the art, when I heard Frank yell out from the classroom behind me. He sounded angry, genuinely pissed off. "Are you messing with me?" he shouted. I turned around, confused. "What are you talking about?" I called back, walking toward him, the classroom doorway. He stepped into the hallway, his flashlight beam swinging wildly. "Quit the act," he said, his voice sharp. Before I could even figure out what he was talking about, he added, "I know you took my bag." My first reaction was just confusion. "Dude, I didn't do anything," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "I've been standing right here in the hallway this whole time." I pointed my light down the corridor to where I had been standing. He followed my beam with his own, then looked back at me, his expression softening just a little. I guess he could tell I was being sincere. He believed me. He let out a frustrated sigh and muttered something under his breath about how it must have been Freddie. To be fair, it was exactly the kind of stupid prank Freddie had a tendency to pull. He loved getting a rise out of us, and hiding Frank's bag full of fresh paint cans would be right up his alley. Still, we searched the classroom with our lights just to be safe. We swept our beams over every corner, under the broken desks, behind the fallen chalkboard. But there was nothing. The bag was just gone. Without the bag, which had all the unused paint in it, we couldn't do much more tagging. So we decided to just go find the guys. We assumed they were probably on the roof by then, having found a way up. We found the nearest stairwell and went as far up as the stairs would take us. But unfortunately, they didn't lead to the roof. The door at the top was bricked over. So we started wandering that top floor aimlessly, checking various rooms for another staircase or maybe a ladder. The building felt even bigger and more labyrinthine now that we were actually looking for something. At one point, I walked into a small side room, probably an old office or storage closet, and I just froze. There on the wall was another pentagram, just like the one we had seen in the basement. Only this one was different. It was much more ominous. It was freshly painted. I could tell because the black paint was still dripping down the wall in slow, thick lines. It was the kind of detail you'd see in one of those creepy animations online, designed to make your skin crawl. And in the corner of the room, sitting on the dusty floor, was Frank's bag. Frank stepped into the room behind me, his flashlight beam landing on the wall, then dropping to the floor. He immediately noticed what I was looking at. He didn't even seem to register the fresh paint or the deeply unsettling vibe of the room. He just saw his bag. Without skipping a beat, he strode over, grabbed it off the floor, and said in a pretty loud voice, "What the hell is wrong with it?" He was still convinced this was Freddy's idea of a joke. I didn't respond. Even for Freddy, this seemed wrong. It crossed a line from a simple prank into something much creepier. Setting up this whole scene, the fresh paint, it felt like way too much effort for a cheap laugh. An uneasy feeling started to creep into the back of my mind, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. We left the room and started walking down another random hallway in silence. All I wanted now was to find our friends and get out of there. The fun of the night was completely gone, replaced by a growing sense of dread. And just then, as we turned a corner, we heard it. Here's a good rule to live by. If someone is running towards you in a dark, abandoned building and they tell you to run, you don't stand there and ask questions. That's just plain stupid. It was Freddy and Yuri. They burst around the corner, their faces pale and slick with sweat, in the beams of our flashlights. Their eyes were wide with a kind of terror I had never seen before. Freddy didn't even say a word. He just grabbed my arm and motioned for us to follow them. We didn't even have time to be pissed at him about the bag anymore. We just ran. As we sprinted down the hallway, the sound of our own feet thundering against the floor was deafening. Yuri was trying to explain what was going on, shouting something over his shoulder, but I couldn't understand a single word over all the noise. All I gathered was that we were running from someone, most likely multiple people. The four of us were desperately trying to find our way back to the exit, but the school was a literal maze in the dark, especially when you're running for your life. It felt like every horror movie trope coming to life, a real-life scary animated story playing out in real time. Eventually, we ducked into a side hallway and stopped to catch our breath, our backs pressed against the cold, peeling wall. It felt like we were in a completely different wing of the building. We all agreed that if we just found a random stairwell and went down, we'd eventually find a way out. For a moment, there was silence. It didn't sound like anyone was chasing us anymore. We decided to move slowly and just be as quiet as possible. It was in that suffocating silence that Frank finally turned on Freddy, his voice a harsh whisper. Was that you with the bag and the pentagram? That's not funny, man. This isn't some stupid 3 a.m. challenge video. Freddy just shook his head, his eyes still wide. No, dude, I swear, he whispered, his voice trembling. That wasn't me. After we left you guys, we heard chanting coming from one of the classrooms. It sounded like something you'd see on a show like IMR. Scary tales, like a demonic ritual. Yuri chimed in, leaning against the wall and trying to control his breathing. I've watched countless videos about creepy abandoned places, even binged those shows about haunted asylums, and I've never felt anything like this. This wasn't a prank. There were 3 of them in cloaks sitting on the floor. This was a classic urban exploring gone wrong situation, the kind you see in those viral horror stories. My mind was racing. Was this real? Or were we just psyching ourselves out? It felt like one of those true horror stories you hear on podcasts, the kind you tell yourself could never actually happen to you. After finding a stairwell, we started heading down, our footsteps now slow and deliberate. Once we got to what we all agreed was the ground floor, we started walking through the hallway, thinking we were in the clear. A steady, sharp hissing. That's the best way I can describe it. The 4 of us froze, instantly, hoping that whoever or whatever was down there hadn't noticed us. We started to slowly and quietly retreat back the way we had come. But as we took our first step back, a deep, gravelly voice said something from beyond the darkness in front of us. It was calm, cold, and filled with a chilling certainty. He said word for word. We didn't wait another second. We just ran. This wasn't a game. It wasn't a prank. This was a genuine fight for our lives. This time I could actually hear them. Several sets of footsteps were thundering behind us, which made things 10 times scarier. They were yelling, shouting obscene things at us from the darkness. Stuff about how they were going to kill us, how they had all the exits covered. It was the single most terrifying moment of my life, a true nightmare fuel experience, a living horror story animated before my eyes. My mind was racing with horrible possibilities. I thought we were going to be the next subjects of some unsolved mysteries video, another group of teens who went into an abandoned place and were never seen again. I thought we were going to have to run back upstairs and hide somewhere, hoping they wouldn't find us. It felt like we were trapped in our own found footage horror film. But somehow, in the midst of the chaos, Yuri took a turn at the right moment. And up, ahead, through the suffocating darkness, we saw it, a faint sliver of moonlight. It was the original door we'd come through. We didn't stop running, even after we burst through the door and made it outside. We scrambled through the hole in the fence and kept sprinting all the way back to Yuri's car. The sound of our own panicked breathing was the only thing we could hear. Yuri peeled out of there, and even though we all instinctively looked back at the school, there wasn't much we could make out in the pitch-black darkness. We weren't sticking around to find out, though. This was no longer just urban exploring. It was an escape. As we were driving away, the adrenaline slowly starting to fade, Freddy finally told us their side of the story. He said that after they failed to find a way to the roof, they had gone down a floor to look for us. Apparently, that's when Freddy started hearing this weird metallic clinking sound coming from one of the classrooms. He thought it was us. He and Yuri walked inside, and what they saw was something straight out of a cult documentary. There were 3 cloaked figures sitting in a circle on the floor, hunched over something. According to Freddy, it looked like they were playing some kind of strange game with glass marbles or polished stones. The room was lit only by a few candles, casting long dancing shadows. It was a classic satanic ritual setup. As soon as the figures noticed Freddy and Yuri, they started scrambling off the floor to chase them. Yuri added, his voice still shaky. It was like stumbling upon a secret society. Their faces, I couldn't really see them under the hoods, but the way they moved was just unnatural, like some jerky, creepy animation. This wasn't some funny story to tell later, not like those true bachelor party horror stories you see compilations of. This was real. Yuri and Freddy ran back up to the 4th floor to try and lose them, which is where they eventually found us. But there were so many things that didn't make sense. The most obvious question was why. Why would they toy with us by taking Frank's bag and leaving it in that creepy room if they had hostile intentions from the start? It felt like something a serial killer would do. Freddy's theory was that they thought we'd never be able to find our way out, so they figured they'd toy with us first, like a cat with a mouse. Yuri thought that the room with the pentagram was where they were going to kill us. I was pretty convinced they hadn't even been chasing us at first. I think they had just gone downstairs to cut us off. Another thing, there must have been at least 4 people in there, since one of them had been messing with us while Yuri and Freddy stumbled upon 3 more. It just didn't add up. I know it might not sound that scary when I break it down like this, but trust me, if you were there, you would have been terrified. It was a real-life encounter with the unknown. The drive home was almost completely silent. No one knew what to say. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving behind a cold, heavy dread. We were all just staring out our windows, the streetlights flashing across our pale faces, each of us lost in our own thoughts, replaying the night's events over and over. What had we actually stumbled into? In the days that followed, we tried to talk about it. Frank, trying to reclaim some normalcy, tried to pass it off as a prank gone wrong. Maybe some other explorers who wanted to scare us off their turf, but none of us really believed that. The cloaks, the hissing, that chilling, specific threat. It was too calculated. We never called the police. I know people hearing this might think that's stupid, but what would we have even said? Hi, we were illegally trespassing and got chased by a satanic cult. We would have been the ones getting into trouble. They would have written us off as kids with overactive imaginations. Our story felt like something that belonged on a forum for unexplained encounters, not in a police report. For weeks I couldn't sleep properly. I kept seeing that freshly painted pentagram in my mind. I'd go down a rabbit hole online searching for things like real cult encounters. I found countless stories, videos, and entire animated horror stories compilation channels dedicated to stuff like this. Their stories were terrifying, but they were just that, stories. Things you put on in the background like horror stories to fall asleep to. Ours was real. It was a memory burned into my mind. Our story felt like it was ripped straight from a no-sleep post, the kind that gets narrated on channels by people like IMR. The kind of story you listen to in the dark to give yourself a chill, but you can always turn it off. We didn't have that luxury. We lived it. It changed things for us. That was the last time we ever went exploring. The thrill was gone, replaced by a very real fear of the unknown. The idea that you could accidentally stumble into someone else's dark reality is terrifying. We never found out who those people were or what they were doing in that school. Were they a real cult? Or were they something worse? People who used the isolation of that place for truly monstrous purposes, and we were almost their next victims. These are the questions that still haunt me. We went looking for a story to tell, and we found one, but it's a story that I now wish I could forget. Because some doors, once you open them, never truly close again. And the most terrifying lesson I learned that night is that the real monsters aren't just in the movies or in the horror stories you find online. Sometimes they're just a 30-minute drive away, waiting for you in the dark.